You have thought about wealth, not casually, not once in passing, but deeply, repeatedly, with the kind of concentrated desire that fills the chest and quiets the room. You have imagined money arriving, imagined a life freed from the weight of financial struggle, imagined abundance flowing toward you like something long owed. You have held that vision in your mind with genuine feeling, with real longing, sometimes with tears behind the eyes. And then you opened them. The visible world had not moved. The bank account said the same number. The circumstances held their shape. The thought, however intense, however sincere, had not become wealth. The conclusion most people draw from this experience is one of two things. Either the law is false or they have not thought hard enough. Both conclusions miss the deeper reality. The mind that believes thinking alone is sufficient to produce visible wealth has misunderstood the nature of the process entirely. A mental image is not automatically money. A desire, however burning, is not automatically a result. There exists between the invisible and the visible a precise law of conversion, not a loose arrangement of wishes, not a casual agreement between imagination and reality, but a structure, a sequence that must be completed. When the sequence is broken at any point, the result does not appear. Not because the law failed, but because the law was never finished. At the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th, a writer named Wallace Wattles placed on paper a set of principles so concentrated and so direct that they have never stopped circulating. What Wattles taught was this: all things visible proceed from an invisible substance he called thinking stuff, a formless living material that permeates all of existence and is capable of being shaped by thought. When the mind impresses a definite form upon this substance, that form begins its movement toward visibility. But Wattles was precise about what was required beyond the thought. The form had to be held steady, energized by faith so that it would not dissolve, connected to its source through gratitude, and given a physical channel through efficient action. Remove any element, and the conversion remains incomplete. This video will reveal that one law, the law that turns thinking stuff into visible wealth. Every stage of the conversion will be examined: what begins it, what sustains it, what threatens it, and what finally brings the invisible into the hands of the person who holds the form. But before that law is fully explained, consider this possibility. You may already be touching the substance. You may already be generating real impressions in the formless field that Wattles described. The reason wealth has not become visible may not be a failure of desire. It may be a failure of completion. The conversion has a final stage, and that stage is where most people stop. There is a particular kind of suffering that does not come from ignorance of the laws of wealth. It comes from partial knowledge of them. The person who has never heard of thinking stuff, who has never studied Wattles, who has never sat with the idea of an invisible, formless substance underlying all things, that person makes ordinary mistakes. But the person who has heard, who has read, who has spent hours with books and teachings about the power of thought and the creative nature of mind, that person experiences a different and more disorienting frustration. They are thinking rich while living poor. They know the language of abundance. They speak it fluently. And yet the gap between what is imagined and what is present remains as wide as it ever was. The mornings begin with intention. The thought of wealth is held. The image is constructed, sometimes a figure, sometimes a feeling, sometimes a scene of life without financial pressure. The practice feels real. It carries emotional weight. And then the day arrives, and the same scarcity that was present yesterday is present again, and the image quietly collapses under the pressure of evidence. Visualizing wealth while operating from fear is not the same as completing the conversion. The person who sees abundance in the mind while acting from the assumption of lack has placed a form upon substance with one hand and erased it with the other. This contradiction runs deeper than behavior. It runs through language. The same person who speaks abundance in the morning tells a story of lack by afternoon, not always in deliberate words, but in tone, in complaint, in the quiet assumption behind every statement about money. The substance, Wattles insists, does not respond to contradiction. It responds to the sustained, definite, emotionally coherent impression held upon it. When the impression is held for a morning and cancelled by a day, nothing has been completed. The mold was formed and then broken before the material could set. Confusion follows. The person who has tried and seen nothing change moves through their days with a particular kind of bewilderment that is different from despair. Despair at least knows what it lost. This bewilderment does not understand why effort has produced no visible return. It questions the law, it questions the practice, it questions the self. The real answer, the one that Wattles provides, is none of those three. The law is not false. The practice is not pointless. The self is not incapable. The sequence simply was not completed. The method most people use when they first encounter the idea of thinking their way into wealth is built from fragments. A thought here, a visualization there, a day of strong belief followed by several days of forgetting, followed by a return to the practice when the need becomes acute enough. This is not the certain way that Wattles described. It is the random way, and random thought, applied to a substance that requires definite impression, produces no coherent form. The mental images themselves are often vague in a way that feels specific. A person imagines being wealthy without imagining what that wealth looks like, how it arrives, through what channel, in what form, connected to what definite purpose. The image is more emotional than architectural. It is more a feeling of relief than a clear construction of what is desired. Relief is not a form. Comfort is not a form. Wattles was explicit. The thought must be definite. The substance can only take the shape of what is clearly given to it. A blurred instruction produces a blurred result, or no result at all. Faith, in this incomplete method, appears as short bursts. During a strong moment, belief feels real and complete. The law seems obvious, the substance seems close, the result seems near. Then an unexpected bill arrives, or a conversation reminds the person of their current financial position, and the burst of faith collapses as quickly as it rose. What remains is not sustained conviction, but a memory of conviction. And a memory of faith is not faith. The impression placed upon the substance requires continuity. A form that dissolves after 3 days has not had enough time to move toward visibility. Gratitude is absent from this incomplete method, or it is reduced to a kind of polite acknowledgement, a momentary thank you spoken at the end of a practice session, disconnected from the deep current that Wattles described as the true connection between the thinker and the source. Without that current running, the thinker is attempting to draw wealth from a supply they have not maintained contact with. And beneath all of this, completing the pattern of incompletion, is the absence of efficient action. The person waits. They believe, in the most passive interpretation of the word, that thought alone moves substance into form without any physical movement on their part. The channel never opens because they never enter the channel. What a vague thought actually produces in the Wattles framework is a vague form, a dim, inconsistent impression upon the substance that cannot organize itself into a clear and solid result. The formless substance is entirely capable of receiving shape. It is made for this, but the shape must be given with clarity and held with steadiness. When the impression is imprecise, what moves toward the thinker is not wealth, but a confused echo of their own confusion. They receive more uncertainty, more vagueness, more evidence that the invisible world is as unclear as the image they sent into it. Broken faith does something more destructive than simply failing to sustain the impression. It actively dissolves the form that was beginning to take shape. Think of a mold placed into setting material that is then pulled free before the material has hardened. The act of pulling is not neutral. It reverses the process. Every moment of genuine doubt, every hour of deep disbelief, every internal collapse of conviction does not merely pause the formation, it dismantles it. The person who thinks with faith for a week and then doubts with intensity for 3 days has not simply made no progress. They have actively returned the form to formlessness. Ungrateful attention, attention fixed on what is absent, on what is still missing, on the gap between the desired and the present, does not merely fail to help. It redirects the thinker's connection away from the source. Gratitude in Wattles' system is not sentiment. It is the mechanism by which the mind stays in contact with the supply. When the attention turns persistently to lack, the connection to supply weakens. The thinker finds themselves disconnected from the very current that would move substance toward them, and what floods the awareness instead is more evidence of absence. Inaction leaves the form without a channel into the visible world. This is perhaps the most structural cost of the incomplete method. The substance shaped by thought and held by faith requires a physical pathway through which to arrive. That pathway is opened by efficient action in the present circumstances, not desperate, not frantic, but definite and calm. When the person waits rather than acts, the form exists in the invisible dimension, but has no opening into the visible one. Wealth cannot become present without a present path. The invisible must have somewhere to arrive, and that somewhere is created only by movement. What all of this points to is a truth that Wattles placed at the center of his teaching. The substance is real, it is available, it is responsive, and it is waiting to receive shape. The formless field that he described is not a metaphor for motivation or a rhetorical device for self-improvement. Within his framework, it is the actual origin of all visible things. It is not distant. It is not withheld. The problem is not that substance is absent. The problem is that the form given to it is incomplete, inconsistent, or entirely missing from the process at critical stages. Visible wealth is not the beginning of the process. It is the last stage. By the time money becomes tangible, by the time the opportunity appears, by the time the channel opens and wealth becomes present in physical life, a long sequence of invisible steps has already been completed. The person who waits at the final stage for wealth to appear without having completed the earlier stages is like someone standing at the end of a river asking why no water is arriving while the source upstream remains blocked. The river is real. The water exists. What is missing is the completed path. The viewer who has attempted to use thought without completing the sequence is not broken. The law has not rejected them. The substance has not withheld itself in judgment. What has happened is simpler and more correctable than those interpretations suggest. The conversion was begun but not carried to its completion. The bridge between invisible and visible was built from one side but never connected to the other. This is not a failure of character. It is a failure of understanding the sequence, and understanding is exactly what this teaching now offers. What follows in this video is the law of conversion itself, explained in its exact components, in the order they operate, and with the precision that Wattles himself considered necessary for what he called the certain way. The certain way is not a vague hope that substance will obey desire. It is a precise sequence that anyone who understands and applies it completely will find operating with the reliability of every other law in existence. It does not depend on special talent or exceptional worthiness. It depends on understanding and completion. The law of conversion, as Wattles presents it, begins with a single act, a definite thought, not a general wish for more, not a vague emotional pressure toward abundance. A definite thought, specific in form, clear in content, particular enough that the substance can receive it as an instruction rather than a noise. Thinking stuff, in Wattles' description, is a living, responsive material. It does not need to be forced. It does not need to be coerced. It needs to be addressed clearly. The mind that forms a precise image of what is desired has given the substance a precise instruction, and the substance begins to move in that direction with the same naturalness and inevitability with which water moves toward its level. Once the definite thought has created its impression, a mold has been formed in the invisible dimension. But a mold must hold its shape until the material within it has set. This is the function of faith in Wattles' sequence. Faith is not blind optimism or emotional performance. It is the quiet, sustained conviction that the impression placed upon the substance is real, that it is taking shape, that the process is underway even when no visible evidence yet confirms it. Without faith, the mold loses its definition. The boundaries soften, the form blurs, and what was a clear instruction becomes a confused signal. Faith is the structural force that keeps the impression intact between its formation and its visible arrival. Gratitude in this system is the current that connects the thinker to the source from which all substance flows. Wattles described it with great seriousness, treating it not as an emotional bonus but as a necessary mechanism The person who maintains genuine gratitude for the good already present in their life, and for the good that is moving toward them through the formation of the mold, remains in an open relationship with the supply. They are, in Wattles' terms, advancing with the tide rather than swimming against it. Gratitude is the acknowledgement that wealth flows from a source that is inexhaustible, and that acknowledgement keeps the channel between thinker and source clear. Efficient action is the stage where most spiritual interpretations of Wattles go wrong by omission. Wattles was emphatic and explicit. Thought does not remove the need for action. Thought transforms the character of action, informs its direction, shapes its quality. But the person who wishes substance to arrive without any physical movement on their part has misunderstood the law entirely. Efficient action is the mechanism by which the form that exists in the invisible is given a pathway into the visible world. The thinker must move, not frantically, not desperately, but definitively in the direction indicated by the impression held. These four elements, definite thought, sustained faith, active gratitude, and efficient action, constitute the law of conversion in its complete form. Removing any one of them does not produce a partial result. It produces an interrupted process. The sequence must be completed. Thinking stuff responds to the full instruction, not to portions of it. And the result of the full instruction, completed faithfully and held to its conclusion, is what Wattles called visible wealth, the substance that has taken form and arrived in the sensory world. Wallace Wattles did not write for the person who wanted a comfortable philosophy. He wrote with the directness of someone who had tested his principles against actual life and found them reliable. His concern was not to make the idea of wealth feel spiritual in an abstract way. His concern was to describe, with the precision of someone who had mapped a territory firsthand, exactly how invisible substance becomes visible result. Reading him is not like reading a motivational author. It is more like reading a mechanic who has taken apart an engine, identified every component, and laid them on a table for inspection. His vision of the certain way is not romantic. It does not flatter the person who wishes to sit in quiet contemplation while wealth assembles itself around their stillness. The certain way demands thinking, and it demands that the thinking be of a particular quality, definite, sustained, and arranged in alignment with the conviction that the law operates, that the substance responds, and that visible wealth is the natural consequence of completed conversion. Wattles uses the word certain to mean reliable, predictable, and lawful, not uncertain, not occasional, not dependent on luck or timing or circumstance. Thought, in his lens, must be specific enough to serve as a genuine instruction. He asks not merely that the reader think of wealth, but that they think of a particular wealth, formed clearly enough that its impression on the substance is unambiguous. Specificity is not arbitrary detail. It is the difference between a signal and a noise. The substance cannot build a house from the instruction something large. It requires dimensions, materials, location. In the same way, the substance cannot form a channel for wealth from the instruction more money. It requires a definite image held with conviction. Action in his lens must be efficient rather than desperate. Efficient action means doing the present thing fully and well, not chasing every opportunity with frantic energy. The person who acts efficiently is not trying to force wealth into existence through effort. They are acting from the impression they hold, expressing the form they have created in the invisible through what they do in the visible. Their work becomes a physical extension of the thought they hold, and through that alignment, channels that were previously closed begin to open. The wealth that appears through this process is not created by the thinker in the sense of being manufactured by personal cleverness. In Wattles's view, the person does not produce wealth. They become the point through which wealth, already present in the substance, passes into visible form. The thinker is the mold, not the material. This is why vanity and arrogance have no place in the certain way. The wealth comes through the person who aligns with law, and the law belongs to the substance itself. The most common distortion of Wattles' teaching reduces the certain way to daydreaming with extra vocabulary. The person who has heard the words thinking stuff and understood them to mean that their preferred mental states are enough has taken one half of a sentence and called it the whole. Thinking is the beginning of the process, not the completion of it. Daydreaming is not thinking in the certain way. It is the mind indulging itself in pleasant images without the structural discipline that makes those images operative. Visualization, as Wattles intends it, is an active and purposeful impression-making, not an exercise in escape from present reality. The person who closes their eyes and imagines a wealthy life as a relief from a difficult present has not formed a mold. They have created a temporary emotional refuge. The difference is the quality of the inner act. Genuine visualization in Wattles's framework involves the conviction that what is being held in mind is being communicated to substance, that the image is not entertainment but instruction. This distinction is not subtle. It determines whether anything actually moves. Faith, in its corrupted form, becomes passive waiting. The belief that desire and time are sufficient, that something external will eventually arrange itself in response to the inner wish. Wattles was sharply critical of this interpretation. He understood that faith without action is not the faith he described. True faith, in the certain way, is the conviction that sustains the mold and simultaneously motivates efficient movement. A person who claims to have faith while refusing to act has confused faith with fatalism. They have mistaken the acceptance of outcome for the engagement with process. Action is not optional in Wattles's system, not because the universe requires proof of effort, but because action is the mechanism by which the form created in the invisible is expressed in the visible. The substance must have a pathway. That pathway is opened by the thinker's movement in the world. Refusing action on the grounds that it signals distrust in the law is a fundamental misreading. Wattles explicitly states that those who practice the certain way will act with more energy, more clarity, and more direction than those who do not less. Wealth, finally, is not pulled from nothing by fantasy. It is not created by the intensity of desire alone. It is the product of a sequence operating through a person who has aligned their inner and outer life with the law. The word fantasy implies the absence of law. Wattles' teaching is entirely about law, about a mechanism so consistent and so reliable that he described it in terms of inevitability. Fantasy has no mechanism. The certain way is nothing but mechanism. To confuse the two is to abandon the very reliability that makes the teaching worth studying. The title of this teaching promises one law that turns thinking stuff into visible wealth. That law, now named and described, operates through a completed sequence. The sequence is not a suggestion. It is not a loose collection of helpful attitudes. It is the precise pathway through which invisible substance becomes visible result. Thinking stuff cannot become wealth by accident. It cannot become wealth through enthusiasm alone or through a single inspired moment of belief. It becomes wealth through a process that has a beginning, a middle, and a necessary completion. Thought begins the sequence by forming the impression. This is the act that initiates everything. Without it, nothing in the invisible dimension has been addressed. The substance continues in its formless state, available but uninstructed. When thought arrives, definite, clear, and sustained, the substance receives a shape. This is where wealth begins its journey from invisible to visible. Not where it arrives, but where it departs from its source. Faith stabilizes what thought has formed. Between the moment of impression and the moment of visible arrival, there is a period of invisible formation, a period during which nothing external confirms that the process is underway, during which circumstances may appear unchanged or even more difficult than before. Faith is the inner structure that keeps the form intact through this period. The thinker who sustains faith through the invisible stage of conversion does not abandon the mold at the moment when abandonment would undo everything. Gratitude maintains the connection to the source from which the substance flows. The thinker who holds genuine gratitude, not as performance but as a lived recognition that wealth flows from an inexhaustible supply and is already moving toward them, remains in relationship with that supply. The connection does not weaken under pressure. The current does not thin when circumstances are difficult. Gratitude is the energetic maintenance of the bridge between the thinker and the source, and without it, the bridge, however well built in thought and faith, gradually loses its foundation. Action gives the form its channel. The visible world requires a physical pathway, and that pathway is created by the thinker's own efficient movement through the present circumstances. When thought, faith, gratitude, and action operate together in their correct sequence, the result is not magical in the sense of unexplained. It is the natural, lawful consequence of a completed conversion. Thinking stuff has received its form. That form has been held through the invisible stage. The connection to supply has been maintained, and the pathway into the visible world has been opened. What arrives is wealth, not by fantasy, not by luck, not by coincidence, but by law completed. Begin with substance. Thinking stuff, as Wattles described it, is the invisible material from which all visible things are made. It is not metaphorical in his system. It is the actual, living, responsive foundation of physical reality. Every object that can be touched or seen or measured was, in the certain way of thinking, first a pattern in this formless field before it became present to the senses. Wealth is no exception. The money that changes hands, the property that is owned, the resources that are available, all of these exist first as potential patterns within the substance, waiting to be shaped by the definite thought of someone who understands the mechanism. Thought is the shaping instrument. The mind does not observe the substance from a distance and hope that it will spontaneously organize into a desired form. The mind impresses a form upon it. This distinction is critical to understanding why passive wishing fails. Observation is not impression. Wishing is not impression. Even strong emotional desire is not impression unless it is organized into a definite, clear, mentally constructed image that the substance can receive as instruction. The shaping instrument works only when it is used, when the mind actively forms the desired wealth into a specific image and holds that image with deliberate intention. Faith is the continuity of the process. A mechanism interrupted at its midpoint does not produce a half result. It produces no result at all because the sequence of causation has been broken. Faith is what prevents that interruption. It is the inner stance that says the process is underway, that the substance is receiving the impression, that the form is taking shape in the invisible dimension, and that the visible arrival is the inevitable conclusion of a process already in motion. Without this continuity, the mechanism stops and starts, stops and starts, and never completes its cycle. Gratitude is the connection to source. In a mechanical analogy, it is the power supply. The mechanism can have all its parts correctly assembled, but if the power is cut, nothing moves. Gratitude is not optional sentiment added at the end of a practice. It is the active current that keeps the thinker plugged into the inexhaustible supply from which substance flows. When gratitude is present and genuine, the relationship between the thinker and the source remains open and energized. When gratitude is replaced by complaint or by anxious attention to absence, the connection weakens and the mechanism slows. Action is the channel. No matter how precisely the invisible formation has been completed, wealth cannot arrive in a visible world without a visible pathway. The substance does not teleport. It moves through channels, through circumstances, through opportunities, through relationships, through the practical engagement of the thinker with their present environment. Action opens those channels. Efficient action opens them with the minimum of waste and the maximum of alignment with the form that has been impressed. The person who acts in the certain way is not working harder than others. They are working in greater alignment with the form they hold. Visible wealth then is formed substance that has completed its journey to the senses. It is the end point of a long sequence that began with a definite thought, was stabilized by faith, energized by gratitude, and given a pathway through action. Nothing miraculous has occurred. Nothing has been taken from another, since the substance is inexhaustible and available to all who use the mechanism. What has happened is simply the completion of a law, the arrival of an inevitable result at the end of a completed process. The sequence begins when desire crystallizes. Not all desire has this quality. Vague wanting, diffuse discontent, the generalized feeling that life should be more, none of these have the organized quality that initiates the mechanism. But when desire becomes specific, when the mind moves from "I want more wealth" to a clear particular image of what that wealth is and how it relates to the thinker's life, something shifts. The desire has become a definite image, and the definite image is ready to serve as an instruction to the substance. The definite image impresses the substance. This impression is not visible to the physical senses, but in Wattles's framework it is entirely real as the pressing of a seal into wax, as real as the carving of a form into clay. The substance receives the shape of the thought and begins to move in response to it. The movement is invisible at first, happening beneath the threshold of sensory confirmation. The person who has made the impression will not immediately see it in the physical world. They will see it only when the process has completed enough stages to break through into visibility. Faith prevents collapse. During the invisible stage, when no external evidence confirms that anything is happening, the mind is under pressure. The habit of taking circumstances as evidence of inner truth is one of the deepest habits the mind carries. When circumstances show no change, the habit says nothing is happening. Faith interrupts this conclusion. It holds the form in place against the pressure of apparent evidence, maintaining the integrity of the impression until the formation has advanced far enough toward visibility that external confirmation begins to arrive. Gratitude keeps the relation between thinker and source active. The substance flows from a source that is not diminished by giving. But the thinker's access to that source depends on their inner orientation toward it. When gratitude is present, the orientation is one of open reception. The thinker acknowledges the abundance already present and the abundance approaching, and in that acknowledgement, the channel from source to thinker remains wide and clear. When the mind turns to complaint or to dwelling on absence, the orientation shifts from reception to resistance, and the flow from source narrows. Action moves the person into contact with the channels through which wealth is expressed. The substance has been shaped. The form is held. The connection to source is maintained. What remains is for the thinker to enter the physical dimension of the process, to move through their present circumstances with efficiency and alignment, engaging the work at hand as a full expression of the form they hold. In doing so, they make themselves available to the channels that the forming substance is arranging on its invisible side. The meeting of the thinker's action and the substance's movement creates what appears to the external observer as opportunity. Contact opens the channel. When efficient action meets the organizing movement of the substance, an opening appears, a conversation, a circumstance, a resource, a relationship, through which wealth can pass from invisible formation into visible presence. This is not coincidence. In the certain way, it is the precise consequence of the sequence operating to completion. The contact was always available as a potential. The thinker's consistent action made them present at the moment the channel became open. And through that open channel, the visible wealth arrives. Not dramatically, not always in a single event, but with the quiet reliability of a law completing its cycle. The substance has taken the form it was given. The faith held the form through its invisible stage. The gratitude maintained the supply. The action opened the channel. What Wattles called the certain result has appeared. The invisible has become visible. Thinking stuff has become wealth. Vague desire is the first interruption, and it operates at the very origin of the sequence. If the instruction given to the substance is unclear, the substance has nothing specific to form. It is not that the substance resists or refuses, it simply cannot build from a design that does not exist. The person who tells the substance, "I want wealth," in the same way they might tell themselves, "I want a better day," has given an emotional note, not a building plan. The sequence has been attempted but not genuinely begun. Changing the image interrupts what has already been started. Every time the thinker alters the definite form they are holding, replacing one desired wealth image with another, revising the picture midway through formation, or abandoning the form entirely and beginning again with a different desire, the substance must dissolve the previous formation and begin responding to the new instruction. Repeated changes mean repeated dissolutions. The substance spends its responsive energy reconstructing the beginning rather than advancing toward completion. Nothing accumulates toward visibility. Doubting the substance is perhaps the most direct form of interruption because it attacks the mechanism at its root. If the thinker holds a definite image with genuine faith, but then, under the pressure of circumstance or the influence of another person's skepticism, concludes that there is no substance, that there is no law, that the whole teaching is false. They have not merely paused the process. They have denied the existence of the material from which their wealth was being formed. The mold is abandoned. The formation stops. The thinker must begin entirely from the beginning if they choose to return to the process. Complaining during formation is a subtler interruption than outright disbelief, and it is more common. The thinker holds their form, maintains their faith intellectually, performs their gratitude practice, and then spends significant daily energy complaining about the present state of their finances. Every complaint is an instruction to the substance, just as every purposeful thought is an instruction. But the instruction the complaint carries is not the form held in deliberate practice. It is the form of lack. And the substance, receiving both instructions, finds itself given contradictory designs. The result is confusion at the invisible level, which is to say, nothing coherent forms. Waiting without action removes the channel. There is no other word for it. The form exists in the invisible. The connection to source is alive, and there is simply no physical pathway through which the wealth can arrive in the visible world. Action is not optional. The channel is not opened by patience alone. It requires movement, engagement, the physical expression of the form through the thinker's present activity. Without it, the process has everything it needs, except its final and indispensable component. Competing instead of creating is the sixth interruption Wattles specifically identified, and it belongs to a different category from the others. The thinker who operates in a competitive mind, who believes that wealth must be taken from another, that the supply is limited, that their gain comes at another's loss, has misunderstood the nature of the substance. The substance is not divided. The supply is not finite. Competing for a share of a limited resource is an entirely different mental operation than creating from an inexhaustible one. The competitive mind applies the wrong mechanism and then wonders why the certain way does not produce its results. Thinking stuff, to make the mechanism more visible to the mind that asks, but how does it actually work, can be imagined as a blank material, not passive like stone or inert like raw cloth, but alive and responsive like a material that is always ready to receive and always capable of forming itself into whatever shape is given to it. It exists in abundance. No single impression depletes it. No single thinker's use of it reduces the amount available to another. It is the one resource that is genuinely inexhaustible, the foundation beneath all the visible resources that appear limited by comparison. Thought, in this metaphor, is the engraving plate. The engraver presses a form into the material that will then produce visible copies of that form. The quality of the engraving determines the quality of what is pressed from it. A vague, poorly carved plate produces dim, incoherent impressions. A sharp, precisely carved plate produces clear, recognizable results. The thought that impresses thinking stuff with a definite, well-formed image of desired wealth is working like a precision plate. The design is clear, the edges are sharp, and what the substance receives from it is unambiguous. Faith holds the plate steady during the pressing. Consider what happens if the plate is removed from the material before the impression has fully formed, or if it is moved while the impression is being made. The design does not transfer. The material receives a partial or blurred instruction, and the result is neither clear nor complete. Faith in the mechanics of conversion is the steady hand that keeps the plate in contact with the material for the full duration required. It does not press harder. It does not force. It simply holds with certainty for as long as the formation requires. Gratitude keeps the press connected to its power source. A printing press without power cannot press. The mechanics can be perfectly arranged, the plate sharp, the material ready, the pressure calibrated. But without the power running, the mechanism is still and silent. Gratitude is the current that keeps this press running. Without it, the thinker may have everything else in order and find that the mechanism has no energy behind it. With it, the formation proceeds continuously, the invisible formation advances, and the connection to the inexhaustible supply of substance remains unbroken. Action in this metaphor is the act of pulling the printed sheet from the press and carrying it into the world. The printing has occurred, but as long as the sheet remains inside the machine, no one outside can receive it. It exists, it is formed, it is complete in the invisible dimension of the press, but it must be moved, carried, placed. It must physically travel from the place of formation to the place of visible arrival. Action moves the printed form out of the invisible mechanism and into the world where others can see it, where it can be handled, where it becomes what any observer would call a visible result. A moving plate, to return to the metaphor, makes a blurred result. This is the image for the thinker, who changes their desired form frequently, who shifts their definite image before it has completed its impression, who begins the process with one vision of wealth and ends the day with a different one. The plate is moving during the press. What results from this is not a new, clear impression of the new design. It is the blurred overlap of both designs, coherent as neither, and therefore incapable of producing anything recognizable in the visible world. The discipline required by the certain way is, in part, the discipline of holding the plate still. When all elements of the press work together, the well-engraved plate, the steady hand, the live power connection, and the carrying of the result into the world, the outcome is not a matter of hope. It is a matter of completion. The mechanism operates, the substance receives its form and moves toward visible expression. The channel opens, the wealth arrives. This is not the explanation Wattles offered as comfort for the uncertain. It is the explanation he offered as a map for those willing to follow the sequence through to its end. The obstacle standing between the viewer and visible wealth is not the absence of substance. The substance is present. It is not the absence of their own desire. The desire is real. It is not even the absence of the knowledge of the law. If they have come this far in this teaching, they have the knowledge. The obstacle is something more specific and more personal. They begin the process in the mind, and then they break it in the emotional body or in the physical life before it can complete. The conversion starts, but does not finish. The bridge is built from one shore, and from there it reaches out over the water and stops, thinking, then contradicting. This is the pattern in its simplest form. The thinker forms the definite image, holds it with real conviction for a period, and then in a moment of emotional honesty about present circumstances, contradicts it with equal conviction. Both instructions have been given, the one made with deliberate intention, and the one made with emotional surrender to evidence. The substance receives them both. What it cannot do is form a coherent result from contradictory designs. The conversion collapses not from external opposition, but from internal division, desire then waiting. The thinker constructs the form, energizes it with genuine faith, and then sits still, interpreting the absence of action as trust. They believe that the highest spiritual stance is to do nothing and observe the law working. They wait for something to shift in the visible world before they move. But the visible world is the destination of the process, not its engine. Waiting for visible confirmation before acting is waiting for the result before providing the channel through which the result must arrive. The desire is real. The form is real. The channel is missing. And without the channel, the conversion stops one stage before completion. This pattern is often invisible to the person living it because it feels coherent from the inside. The thought is present. The belief is present. The desire is intense. The expectation, at least in some moments, is alive. What they cannot see is that the emotional contradiction in the afternoon undoes the morning's impression, or that their refusal to act, dressed as spiritual trust, is functionally identical to the action of someone who has no knowledge of the law at all. The result is the same. Nothing visible changes. The inner enemy of conversion is clever precisely because it speaks in the vocabulary of the teaching itself. I already thought about it. Sounds like the report of someone who has done their work. In the certain way, thinking is the beginning, not the completion. But the phrase carries the weight of completion. It signals that the task is finished, that the next stage is someone else's responsibility, that the thinker has done what was required and is now owed a result. This is a misunderstanding dressed in correct language. I visualized, So why isn't it here? Carries the same structure. The question sounds like a frustrated practitioner. It sounds like someone who has applied the law and been failed by it. But embedded in the question is the assumption that visualization alone is the full application of the law. The frustration is genuine. The failure is real. What is not accurate is the diagnosis. Visualization is the first instrument in a four-part sequence. When the question is asked, 3 of the 4 parts are missing, and the person is not experiencing the failure of the law, but the consequence of applying a fraction of it. "I'm waiting for the universe to arrange itself" has become a popular spiritual position, and it sounds on its surface like humility, like the willingness to let a greater force work without interference. But in Wattles' framework, the universe arranges itself around efficient action, not around patient stillness. The arrangement happens invisibly, and its visible expression requires that the thinker move. Waiting for visible arrangement before moving is demanding that the law produce its result before the thinker has provided the channel. It is not humility. It is the avoidance of action dressed as trust. If I act, it means I don't trust the law may be the most refined disguise. It sounds like the logical conclusion of faith. If I truly believe the substance will provide, why would I need to act? What Wattles provides as the answer is simple. Because action is part of the law. Faith does not replace action. Faith motivates action. The thinker who holds genuine conviction that the law is operating will act with calm certainty, because their action is the expression of their conviction, not evidence against it. Refusing action in the name of faith has confused non-interference with non-participation. These are all expressions of an incomplete law masquerading as a complete one. Each phrase contains a portion of the teaching, thought, visualization, trust, faith, presented as though that portion is the whole. The disguise is effective because the vocabulary is accurate. What is inaccurate is the scope. The inner enemy does not attack the law from outside. It claims to be the law while quietly dismantling the parts that require more of the thinker. When the incomplete method is maintained over time, disappointment becomes the thinker's primary relationship with the law of conversion. They have tried, they have thought, they have visualized, they have spoken abundance. Nothing visible has changed, and the gap between what was expected and what arrived has grown wide enough to cast doubt on everything. The disappointment is not irrational. It has evidence behind it. The evidence, however, is evidence of incomplete application, not evidence of a failed law. The conclusion that follows disappointment is often the most costly outcome of the entire pattern. The thinker calls the law false. The teaching is dismissed as wishful thinking, or as the kind of philosophy that works for some people but not for others, or as an elaborate encouragement that has no actual mechanism behind it. And having made that conclusion, the thinker abandons the very framework that, had it been applied in its complete form, would have delivered the result they desired. They walked away from the mechanism just before learning how to use it correctly. Disconnected from visible channels, the thinker returns to ordinary life, not a bad life necessarily, but a life in which wealth is earned through effort alone, without the additional force of the law operating behind the effort. The channels that Wattles described, the opportunities that open, the relationships that form, the circumstances that arrange themselves in the direction of the thinker's definite form, remain unavailable to someone who has concluded that no such channels exist. The conclusion creates its own confirmation. The channels are not perceived because the mind has stopped looking for them, and the action that would open them is not taken because the conviction that supports it has been abandoned. The bridge remains unfinished. This is perhaps the truest description of the cost. The thinker is standing on the invisible shore, looking at where the bridge begins, unable to see the visible shore because the bridge does not reach it. The construction material is present. The design exists. The law governing the construction is available. What is missing is the willingness to complete the sequence, and the willingness cannot arrive without a clear understanding of what completion requires. The cost of the inner enemy, finally, is not just the wealth that did not arrive. It is the permanent sense of living adjacent to a law that never seems to work. A law that is in fact always working, but never quite for them. The correction begins with a single act of clarity. Make the image definite. not eventually. Not when it feels easier or when circumstances are more favorable. Now in the present moment, with the forms of wealth already available to the mind, the vague desire must be organized into a specific image, particular in character, clear in form, detailed enough that the substance can receive it as an unambiguous instruction. This is the first movement of the correction, and it requires nothing external. It requires only the focused discipline of the mind. Having made the image definite, hold it. This is not a passive act. Holding the form against the pressure of contrary circumstance, against the doubt that arises when evidence of absence is still present, against the habit of revising what has been set, this is a sustained inner discipline, but it is one that has a direction and a purpose. The form is held not because the thinker is forcing something into being, but because they understand that the formation requires continuity, and continuity requires that the mold remain intact. Enter gratitude, not at the conclusion of practice, not as a ceremonial coda, but as an active and genuine acknowledgement that the source is inexhaustible, that the supply is already moving, that the wealth in the process of formation is real, even in its invisible stage. Gratitude is the inner position of someone who is already in relationship with what is coming. Not desperately requesting, not anxiously hoping, but acknowledging from a place of open, warm certainty that the law is operating and that the supply is sufficient. Act in the present place. The channel does not open somewhere else at a better time under more favorable conditions. It opens here in the present circumstances through the work that is already available. Efficient action means engaging fully with the present opportunity, not waiting for a grander stage, not postponing movement until the form becomes visible, but expressing the held form through every action available right now. The bridge to the visible world is built from the invisible shore by the thinker who moves, and it is built one action at a time in the place where they currently stand. Something must end before the conversion can complete. The first thing that must stop is vague thinking, the daily habit of circling wealth in the mind without ever landing on a definite form. Circling is not the same as forming. The orbit of a satellite around a planet does not place the satellite on the planet's surface. The mind that orbits the desire for wealth, visiting it in passing, feeling its pull without constructing a specific image, has not yet done the work of the certain way. Vague thinking must be replaced by deliberate, definite architectural thought, the kind that carves a clear instruction into the substance and holds it there. Collapsing the form must also stop. Every time the definite image is abandoned under the pressure of contrary evidence, the formation that has begun in the invisible dimension is dissolved. This is not a mild setback. It is the undoing of invisible work that in many cases may have been approaching the threshold of visible expression. The person who collapses their form just before the channel opens, and this happens more often than they can know, has ended the process at its most critical moment. The habit of collapse, the emotional retreat from conviction when circumstances refuse to confirm it, is the single most costly inner practice in the context of the certain way. Complaining during formation must stop. This is more difficult than it sounds because complaint is often the default language of community, the shared acknowledgement of difficulty that binds people together in ordinary life. But every hour spent in genuine complaint about financial lack is an hour spent actively impressing the substance with the form of lack. The thinker cannot hold the form of wealth in deliberate practice and then give the substance the form of poverty through unguarded speech and unmanaged thought for the remainder of the day. One instruction must dominate. The certain way requires that the instruction be the one chosen in conscious practice. Waiting for wealth without channel must stop. The wealthy future is not arriving through stillness. The channel must be opened, and the channel is opened by the thinker's efficient movement through their present circumstances. The stopping of waiting is not the beginning of frantic effort. It is the beginning of calm, purposeful engagement with the work at hand. Work done with the full inner conviction that the form is held, that the substance is responding, and that the movement of the thinker in the world is the final link in the chain of conversion. Calling fantasy faith must stop. This distinction is the hinge on which the entire correction turns. Fantasy demands the result without providing the sequence. Faith operates through the sequence. Fantasy is comfortable because it requires nothing of the present self. No discipline, no sustained effort, no action. Faith is demanding because it requires all four components of the certain way, maintained through the entire invisible stage of formation. The person who has been practicing fantasy must recognize it clearly, name it accurately, and replace it with the four-part practice that constitutes genuine faith in Wattles's teaching. What must be accepted is the full law, not the portion that asks nothing of the thinker. And the first thing the full law asks is that thought be definite. This acceptance means abandoning the comfort of vague aspiration and taking on the discipline of specific formation. It means deciding what the desired wealth is, its character, its form, its relationship to the life being built, and committing that definition to the mind with enough clarity that it can serve as a real instruction to the substance. Definite thought is not complicated, but it is demanding, because definiteness requires the thinker to choose, and choosing means abandoning the endless possibility of the undefined. Faith must be accepted as a sustained discipline rather than an occasional feeling. There will be days when faith feels easy and natural, days when circumstance aligns, when energy is high, when the invisible process seems close to the surface. And there will be days when sustaining the conviction requires genuine inner effort, when evidence is scarce and doubt is present. The certain way operates on both kinds of days. Faith that functions only when conditions are favorable is not the faith Wattles describes. What must be accepted is the responsibility for maintaining the mold even when the weather inside changes. Gratitude must be accepted as an active practice rather than a passive sentiment. This means returning to it deliberately throughout the day, not waiting until the end of a meditation session to offer a brief acknowledgement of abundance, but maintaining the orientation of genuine thankfulness as the background tone of daily inner life. Gratitude as active practice is the recognition that the supply is already moving, that the source is already generous, that the wealth in formation is real even before it is visible. This orientation keeps the connection from narrowing under the pressure of present appearances. Efficient action must be accepted without reservation, not frantic action, not desperate effort, not the kind of exhausting striving that comes from fear of lack. Efficient action is the calm, purposeful engagement with the present opportunity, doing the work at hand with full commitment and genuine skill, knowing that this work is the physical expression of the form held in the invisible. Accepting action as spiritual practice, as the final link in the chain of conversion rather than as evidence of insufficient faith, is the acceptance that completes the law. And wealth, visible wealth, must be accepted as the lawful result of this sequence, not as a gift, not as luck, not as the reward of particularly virtuous people, but as the natural consequence of the law operating to completion. Wealth becomes visible through channels. Those channels open in response to the completed sequence. The person who accepts this fully has accepted what Wattles called the certain way, and certainty, in his use of the word, means that the result is as reliable as every other operation of law in existence. The new inner position begins with a statement that is both declaration and mechanism. Substance becomes wealth through the form I hold, not through luck, not through favor, not through talent alone. Through the form held in mind, sustained in faith, energized by gratitude and channeled through action. This statement is not affirmation in the empty sense, not a phrase repeated until it feels comfortable. It is a description of a law, spoken in the first person, accepted as one's own operating principle. The thinker who inhabits this statement has accepted the full mechanism as their personal reality. I complete the conversion. This is the corrective position for every previous pattern of incompletion. The thinker who has spent years beginning the process and abandoning it, forming the image and collapsing it, touching the substance and withdrawing from the channel, now claims completion as their commitment. Not a wish for completion, not a hope that this time will be different, a declaration of the inner stance they are choosing. The conversion is complete because they complete it. The sequence operates because they maintain it through every stage. I think, believe, thank, and act. This phrase contains the entire certain way in 4 verbs. Every element of the sequence is named. Thinking creates the form. Believing holds it. Thanking connects to the source. Acting opens the channel. The thinker who claims this as their inner position has made the sequence personal. They are not observing a law that operates on others. They are the person through whom the law operates. The 4 verbs are 4 daily commitments, arranged in their correct order, maintained from beginning to visible arrival. The invisible becomes visible through law. This is the final note of the new inner position, the recognition that what is happening is not mysterious, not arbitrary, not dependent on the favor of external forces. It is law. The invisible becomes visible not by accident, but by the operation of a sequence that has been functioning since the substance first received form from thought. The thinker who holds this position is not hoping that the law will work. They are operating within the law, contributing their 4-part sequence to the mechanism that has always been capable of delivering visible wealth to anyone willing to complete it. Every teaching about inner law arrives at a moment when knowledge must become choice. The information has been given, the mechanism has been described, the interruptions have been named and the corrections offered. What remains is not more instruction but a decision, the kind of decision that determines whether the teaching becomes lived reality or remains an interesting idea that visited for a time and then dissolved back into the general noise of inspiration. Fantasy has a particular appeal that should be acknowledged honestly. It offers the result without the sequence. It promises wealth without the discipline of definite thought, without the sustained work of faith, without the daily return to gratitude, without the engagement of action. Fantasy is comfortable, even intoxicating, because it holds the image of the desired result while asking nothing difficult of the present moment. It is a kind of warm, painless waiting that feels like trust and acts like avoidance. The desire for wealth is genuine. The object of the fantasy is real. What is false is the mechanism. There is no sequence, no law, no completion. Law demands more. The certain way is demanding precisely because it is real. Real mechanisms require real engagement. The sequence must be completed, not once in a peak moment of inspiration, but consistently enough that the invisible formation has time to advance through its stages and emerge into visible expression. This is not an unusual demand. Every visible result in the physical world requires the completion of its invisible causes. Wealth is not exempt from this. The thinker who accepts law accepts the demands of law, and accepts with equal certainty the results that completed law produces. The choice between fantasy and law is the decision that stands between the thinker and visible wealth. Both are available. Both feel, from the inside, like engagement with the idea of wealth. Only one delivers the result. The person who reads this teaching and nods and returns to their previous practice of vague visualization and passive waiting has chosen fantasy, not because they are weak or unworthy, but because they have not yet made the decision with the full weight of understanding behind it. The person who reads this teaching and commits to completing the sequence, definitively, fully, from thought through action, has chosen law. And law, as Wattles taught, does not fail those who complete it. The daily shift begins in the first hour of waking, before the day has impressed its demands upon the mind, before the inbox, before the obligations, before the familiar weight of present circumstances settles into place. This is the moment to define the desired wealth form with deliberate clarity, not to revisit it vaguely, not to remind oneself that abundance is desired, but to construct the specific image of the wealth that has been chosen, its character, its form, the channel through which it most naturally arrives, and to hold that image long enough that the substance has received a clear instruction to begin its day with. Once the image is formed, the second daily shift is perceptual. See the desired form as already impressed upon the substance, not as a future possibility, not as something approaching from a distance. As a form that is already present in the invisible dimension, already shaped, already moving, already in the process of advancing toward visible expression. This is not denial of present circumstances. It is the inner acknowledgement of what Wattles described as the prior stage of all visible things. The wealth is real in the substance before it is real in the bank account. The thinker who perceives it this way has made an entirely different relationship with the law than the one who waits for visible evidence before conceding that the process has begun. Keeping the image stable throughout the day is the third shift, and it is perhaps the most demanding. The day will bring evidence of the present circumstances. Conversations, numbers, memories, all of them pressing against the held form with the weight of the familiar. The stable image does not mean refusing to acknowledge reality. It means declining to treat present circumstances as the final word on what is forming. The mold can be held while the environment remains unchanged. The plate can stay steady while the press is still in motion. Stability of image is not rigidity of mind. It is the disciplined refusal to let the evidence of where one is collapse the vision of where the law is delivering them. The fourth shift is in what is looked for. The person who has impressed the substance and held the form must begin looking for channels rather than waiting for miracles outside of action. A channel is not a miracle. It is a practical opening, a conversation that leads somewhere unexpected, a circumstance that offers more than it initially appears. A piece of work that, done fully and well, places the thinker in contact with the next link in the chain. The shift from waiting for wealth to appear to actively watching for channels is a shift from passivity to engaged expectation. The eyes open differently when they are looking for the specific thing that law is organizing. Act from the form. This is the fifth daily shift, and it closes the loop. Not acting from present lack, not making daily decisions from the position of the wealth that has not yet arrived, but acting from the position of the form that has been held. The person who acts from the held form moves through their day with the quality of someone who knows the process is underway. Their engagement with the present work is full and efficient. Their choices align with the shape of the wealth being formed. Their movement through the world expresses the inner conviction that the conversion is in progress, and in expressing that conviction through action, they open the channels that make it visible. The mind carries an automatic narrator, and that narrator has learned to report the absence of visible change as evidence that nothing is happening. The correction is not to silence the narrator, but to change its script. When the thought arises, as it will reliably and often, that nothing is happening, the replacement is not a cheerful denial. It is an accurate description of what the certain way teaches. The form is being held. The invisible stage of formation is underway. The absence of visible confirmation is exactly what the invisible stage looks like from the outside. Something is happening. It is simply happening where the senses cannot yet reach. The thought "I only need to think" carries within it the entire pattern of incompletion. It is the thought that stops the sequence after the first step and calls the sequence finished. The replacement for this thought is the full commitment of the certain way. I complete the law, not I initiate it, not I contribute to it occasionally. I complete it through thought, through faith, through gratitude, through action, from beginning to visible arrival. This is not a demanding thought to hold, but it is a different one, and the difference between them is the difference between a partial sequence and a full one. I have no channel is perhaps the most paralyzing of the ordinary thoughts that interrupt conversion. It carries the conclusion that action is impossible, that there is nowhere to move, no door to enter, no work that could serve as the physical expression of the held form. The correction Wattles offers is both practical and metaphysical. Act where you are, and channels open. The channel does not exist before the action. The action creates the opening through which the channel becomes visible. The person who declares "I have no channel" and therefore does not act is insisting on seeing the door before agreeing to walk toward it. The certain way asks for movement first. The door appears to those in motion. These three thought corrections are not affirmations in the sense of pleasant phrases pasted over unpleasant realities. They are accurate descriptions of how the law operates. The form is being held is accurate. I complete the law is a commitment to accuracy. I act where I am and channels open is an observation about what action does in the Wattles system. Replacing the old automatic thoughts with these new ones is replacing an inaccurate map with an accurate one. And a person who navigates by an accurate map reaches their destination, while a person who navigates by an inaccurate one continues to be surprised by where they arrive. Each time the thought correction is made, the brain is being trained toward the pattern of the certain way. The discipline is not permanent struggle. It becomes, over repetition, the default orientation, the automatic stance of a mind that has internalized the law well enough that it no longer defaults to the old patterns of vague aspiration and passive waiting. The thinker who reaches that point has not merely learned Wattles. They have become the kind of person through whom the law operates with ease, because their inner landscape has been built in its shape. Action in the certain way begins with the present work, not the ideal work that would be available if the wealth were already visible, not the grander action that would be possible if the channel were already fully open, the work at hand, available today, in the present circumstances. Doing that work fully and well is not a consolation. It is the specific act through which the held form expresses itself physically, and through which the thinker becomes available to the channels that are organizing themselves on the invisible side of the conversion. The present work is never too small to be efficient. Efficiency is about quality of engagement, not scale of stage. Desperate action, by contrast, must be avoided with the same deliberateness that vague thought must be avoided. Desperate action arises from fear, from the feeling that the law must be forced, that wealth will not arrive unless pursued with frantic energy. Wattles was clear about the quality of action he intended. It is efficient, not exhausting, definite, not frantic, aligned with the held form, not driven by the panic of present lack. Desperation is itself a form of vague impression. It sends the substance the image of someone afraid of lack, and that is not the form through which wealth flows. Calm, purposeful engagement is the character of action in the certain way. The spiritual position that treats action as unspiritual must also be gently but firmly set aside. This position has a logic that sounds coherent. If the law is real, if the substance responds to thought, then effort should be unnecessary. But this logic misunderstands what action is in the certain way. Action is not evidence of insufficient trust in the law. Action is the law completing its final stage. The person who acts efficiently in alignment with their held form is not compensating for a failure of faith. They are performing the fourth and final operation of the conversion. Action is as spiritual as thought, because in the certain way, it is the mechanism through which the invisible becomes visible. Let action express the impressed form. This is the quality that distinguishes action in the certain way from action in ordinary life. In ordinary action, the person moves through their work driven by habit, obligation, or the need to maintain present circumstances. In action aligned with the held form, every engagement with the present work carries the inner quality of the conversion in progress. The thinker is not merely doing their job, they are expressing the form they have impressed upon substance through the physical dimension of their daily life. The work becomes an extension of the thought, and the thought becomes tangible through the work. The result of making action efficient, calm, and definite, aligned in its character with the certain way, is that the thinker moves through their day in a fundamentally different relationship with their circumstances. Channels that appeared closed begin to show openings. Conversations that seemed routine reveal unexpected directions. Work that seemed unrelated to the desired wealth form turns out to be directly adjacent to the channel through which that wealth arrives. This is not coincidence. It is the consequence of action that is aligned with the invisible formation underway, and visible wealth, when it arrives, always appears to have been prepared by circumstances that the deliberate, efficient thinker was already moving through. Doubt will arrive. This is not a pessimistic prediction. It is an honest description of what the invisible stage of conversion feels like from the inside. The form is held, the action is being taken, the gratitude is present, and yet weeks may pass without visible confirmation. The mind, accustomed to measuring progress by evidence it can see, begins to whisper that the thought is useless, that the law is not operating, that the effort is in vain. This whisper is not wisdom. It is the automatic response of a mind that does not yet have full fluency in the language of invisible formation. The correction for it is the return to the full sequence, Not the return to more intense thinking, but the deliberate re-engagement of all 4 stages. Return to the image and clarify it. Doubt often arises not because the sequence is failing, but because the form has gradually softened. The specific image has blurred slightly under the pressure of time and the absence of external confirmation. The first step of restoration is to bring the image back to its original sharpness, or even sharper. Revive the specific form, rebuild the clear definition of what is desired, and re-establish it as the single instruction given to the substance. Not a new desire, the same one clarified. The mold has been allowed to soften. Resharpening it is the first act of restoration. Re-enter gratitude. The doubt that arises under the pressure of delayed visible arrival often disconnects the thinker from the sense of supply that gratitude maintains. The mind, focused on what has not yet appeared, loses contact with the abundance that is already present and the abundance that is approaching through the invisible stage. Re-entering gratitude is not a forced performance. It is the deliberate return of the attention to what is present and good, the health, the capacity, the knowledge, the present work, the law itself. And from that genuinely acknowledged abundance, the connection to source is restored. Take one action. Doubt has a physical component. It produces stillness, a kind of holding back, a reluctance to move that compounds the sense that nothing is progressing. The single most effective counter to this stillness is a deliberate, specific, efficient action taken in alignment with the held form. Not a grand action, not a desperate correction of the entire process. One clear, specific, present engagement with the channel. A letter written, a conversation initiated, a piece of work done fully and well. The action interrupts the stillness, restores the thinker to the position of someone who is completing the conversion, and reactivates the final stage of the mechanism. Refuse to break the mold. This is the commitment that holds everything together when doubt is present. The mold can be clarified, re-energized, gratitude restored, action resumed, but all of this is undone by the collapse of conviction at the critical moment. Wattles' teaching asks for the one thing that doubt most directly targets: the refusal to treat the doubt's conclusion as a fact. The conclusion that thought is useless, that the law does not operate, that the substance does not respond. None of these are facts. They are the reactions of a mind that is measuring an invisible process by visible standards. The refusal to accept that conclusion, held firmly enough and long enough, is what carries the thinker through the final invisible stage to the threshold of visible arrival. A person sits with the idea of wealth, the general, diffuse idea that more should be present in their life. They have thought about it in this vague way for months or years. They have felt its absence. They have spoken about it in the language of aspiration. But the desired form has never been made specific, and so the substance has never received a clear instruction. The impression given has been the equivalent of pressing a hand against clay without any intention behind the gesture. A mark has been left. But it is not the mark of anything in particular. They decide, following the certain way, to make the form definite. Not more wealth, but a specific form of wealth. A particular capacity they wish to develop. A particular channel through which abundance can flow into their life. An image held with enough detail that the substance can receive it as an unambiguous design. The image is constructed carefully, held in the mind with patience, and returned to daily with the deliberate conviction that it is being impressed upon the responsive substance of which all visible things are made. The feeling behind the image changes, from desperate hoping to engaged certainty. The mold has been placed. The impression is being made. They hold faith through the period when nothing visible changes. The days pass, and the circumstances remain as they were. The doubt arrives, the familiar whisper that this is imagination, that nothing real is happening, that the law is not operating. They clarify the image. They re-enter genuine gratitude. They take the action that is available in the present place, not the ideal action they will take when wealth has arrived, but the specific, calm, efficient engagement with the work that is in front of them today. The action is not frantic. It is not desperate. It is the physical expression of the form held in the invisible, the final link that opens the channel. A visible channel appears, not a dramatic reversal of fortune, not a sudden miraculous event, but a specific opening, a conversation that leads somewhere, a circumstance that aligns with the form that has been held, an opportunity that would not have been present or perceived without the action taken and the form sustained. Through that channel, wealth begins to arrive, not all at once, but in the first visible expression of a formation that has been underway since the definite thought was first impressed. Substance has become wealth, not by accident, not by luck, but because a person understood the sequence, held the form, sustained the faith, maintained the gratitude, and acted efficiently until the invisible became visible, exactly as the law requires. Strip everything away and what remains is this. Thinking stuff becomes visible wealth through the form that is given to it by a definite mind. The substance is always present. The supply is always inexhaustible. The law is always operating. The only variable is whether the thinker has completed the sequence through which the invisible is delivered into the visible. Everything that Wattles taught, across the full depth of his work, can be understood as the elaboration of this single principle. Substance becomes wealth through form. Thought gives the substance its shape. Without that shape, the substance remains formless, present, available, and inert. Faith holds the form. Between the moment of impression and the moment of visible arrival, the thinker's conviction is the only force preventing the dissolution of what has been built. This is why Wattles placed such emphasis on faith that is steady, sustained, and grounded in the understanding of law rather than the evidence of current circumstances. The form requires a keeper, and the keeper is the mind that refuses to withdraw its conviction before the formation is complete. Faith is not the hope that something might happen. It is the certainty that something already is. Gratitude connects the thinker to the source. No connection, no supply. The substance flows from an origin that has no limit, but the thinker's access to that origin depends on their inner alignment with it. Genuine gratitude, maintained as the background tone of the inner life, is the alignment that keeps access open. It is the acknowledgement that the source is generous, that the supply is real, and that the wealth forming in the invisible dimension is already being given before it is visible. This acknowledgement is not passive. It is the active maintenance of the most important relationship in the conversion, the thinker's relationship with the substance from which all wealth comes. Action opens the channel. All the invisible work of thought, faith, and gratitude must have a physical pathway into the visible world. That pathway is created by the thinker's efficient engagement with their present reality, doing the work at hand with full commitment, moving in the direction indicated by the held form, making themselves available through action to the channels that the organizing substance is arranging on its side of the invisible. Action is the final stage of the law. It is not separate from the spiritual work. It is the completion of it. When action joins thought, faith, and gratitude, the sequence is complete, the law is satisfied, and the visible arrival of wealth is no longer a hope. It is the inevitable conclusion of a completed sequence. The old life of the thinker who understood this law partially looks like this. Thoughts about wealth that were vague and repetitive, but never organized into a definite form. Cycles of belief that rose with inspiration and collapsed with circumstance. Gratitude that was spoken but rarely felt as a genuine connection to supply, and an absence of action rooted in the belief that action was either unnecessary or spiritually suspect. This is not a life of laziness or ignorance. It is the life of someone who received half a map and navigated as faithfully as that half map allowed. The destination was sought. The means were genuinely applied as far as they were understood. The result was that the bridge was built and rebuilt, always from the same shore, always stopping short of the other side. The new life is organized differently, from the inside. It begins with a definite form, a specific, clear, deliberately chosen image of wealth that serves as the instruction given to the substance. It continues with faith that is maintained as a discipline rather than received as an occasional gift, a faith that knows what it is doing, why it is necessary, and what it is preventing when it holds the form against the pressure of circumstance. Gratitude runs through this new life as a current rather than a ceremony, a genuine and sustained acknowledgement of the inexhaustible source to which the thinker maintains an open connection. The old mind waits. It waits for visible confirmation before extending its belief. It waits for the channel to be visible before agreeing to move. It waits for the law to prove itself before committing to the sequence. In waiting, it removes the one element without which the law cannot complete its final stage. The new mind does not wait. It acts in the present place with the calm certainty of someone who understands what their action is doing, opening a channel, expressing a form, completing a sequence. The new mind is not indifferent to timing, but it understands that the visible arrives through the invisible, and that patience in faith is different from passivity in waiting. The new mind completes the conversion. This is its defining characteristic. Where the old mind began and withdrew, the new mind begins and continues. Where the old mind formed a clear image and then softened it under pressure, the new mind holds the plate steady. Where the old mind disconnected from the source during difficulty, the new mind returns to gratitude as its most reliable navigational instrument. Where the old mind confused spiritual trust with physical avoidance, the new mind understands that action and faith are not opposites. They are the fourth and second stages of the same law. The conversion is completed, and what was invisible becomes visible, because a mind has learned to complete the sequence. Thought does not become wealth by accident. This is the first and final clarity of the entire teaching. The accident theory of wealth, that it arrives randomly through fortune, through being in the right place without the operation of inner law, is not what Wattles describes. It may sometimes appear that way from the outside, when someone who has been applying the certain way without announcing it receives a visible result that seems to others like good fortune. From the inside of the sequence, no accident has occurred. A law has been completed. A form was made definite, held through an invisible stage, connected to its source through gratitude, and channeled through efficient action. The result was not luck. It was the end of a completed sequence. The substance does not obey confusion. This is the most direct explanation for why the ordinary method, the vague visualization, the brief burst of belief, the passive waiting, fails to produce visible results. The substance is responsive. It is, in Wattles' description, the most responsive material that exists, capable of receiving and acting upon the impressions given to it by a definite mind. But its responsiveness is to clarity, not to noise. It cannot obey two contradictory instructions simultaneously. It cannot build from a design that keeps changing. It cannot form a channel for wealth through a field of complaint about lack. It responds to the clear, sustained, consistent impression made by a mind that has organized itself into the certain way. The invisible becomes visible through completed law. This sentence contains the whole teaching in a form that can be held and returned to, not through circumstance, not through effort alone, not through desire alone. Through completed law, the full sequence of thought, faith, gratitude, and action operating in its correct order, maintained through its invisible stage, and expressed through the physical world until the formation becomes present to the senses. The invisible has always been the prior state of every visible thing. Every piece of wealth that exists in the world was first a form in the substance before it was a form in the material world. The certain way is the conscious, deliberate, lawful participation in that process of conversion. There is only one honest response to a law this complete, this precise, and this available: a vow to use it fully, not to admire it, not to revisit it occasionally when circumstances are difficult. To complete the sequence, every day with the held form, the sustained faith, the active gratitude, the efficient action, until the invisible form held has expressed itself in every visible channel it is capable of producing. The law does not change between one thinker and another. It operates with the same reliability for everyone who completes the sequence. The only distinction is between those who complete it and those who do not. Now is the moment to make that vow personal, to take the law from the level of teaching into the level of inner commitment. The statement that expresses this commitment is not a phrase taken on loan from an author long dead. It is the articulation of a living inner position, a declaration of what the thinker chooses to be in relationship to the invisible substance that underlies all visible wealth. Speak it as a law of your own life, not as a quotation from someone else's. The law belongs to the substance, but the completion of it belongs to the person who stands at this moment in front of the choice. If you have followed this teaching to this point, you already understand what the ordinary mind does not, that wealth begins in the invisible, that substance is responsive to a definite mind, and that the only question the law ever asks is whether you will complete the sequence. The declaration is not an aspiration. It is the statement of a person who has accepted the full mechanism and chosen to live inside it. Write it in the comments below, not as a wish, but as a law of your inner life. Let it stand as a commitment to the certain way, spoken clearly, in the same way that a definite thought speaks to the substance. Substance becomes wealth through the form I hold. This is the identity of someone who has stopped waiting for the invisible to become visible without their participation, and started completing the law. Say it as the thinker who now understands what form means, what holding it requires, and what becomes possible when the sequence runs from thought through faith, through gratitude, through action, without interruption. Not the identity of someone hoping, the identity of someone who completes. Let the words carry weight when you write them. This is not a comment. It is a mold pressed into the attention of everyone who reads it, including yourself. Substance becomes wealth through the form I hold. This is the law. This is the identity. This is the starting position of the certain way, claimed personally, spoken openly, and operative from the moment it is genuinely meant. Wallace Wattles left behind a body of teaching that this channel is committed to exploring in its full depth. If this teaching on thinking stuff, the conversion law and the certain way has opened something in your understanding of how invisible substance becomes visible wealth, there is more here for you. Subscribe to this channel to receive further teachings from Wattles on definite thought, on the nature of wealth, on efficient action, on gratitude as mechanism, and on the complete architecture of the certain way. The depth of his work rewards patient return, and this channel is built around that return. Everything here is designed for the kind of person who wants to understand the hidden laws behind visible results, not the person who wants an easy summary, but the person who wants the real mechanism. If that is you, you are in the right place. Subscribe and stay with the teaching. From this moment, the vague thought ends. The circling of desire without the formation of a definite image ends. The brief bursts of belief followed by long collapses into doubt end. What begins in their place is the certain way, the clear image held in a disciplined mind, the faith maintained through the invisible stage, the gratitude that keeps the connection to source alive and open, the efficient action that opens the channel. No more beginning the sequence and withdrawing before it is finished. The mold is placed. It will be held. The conversion will be completed. From this moment the form is held, not approximately, not on favorable days and abandoned on difficult ones. Held with the quiet certainty of someone who has understood what the substance requires and who is committed to giving it exactly that. The invisible formation is underway. The bridge is being built from both shores now. The channel is opening. The visible is approaching through the law that has always governed the movement of substance toward the form given to it by a definite, faithful, grateful, and acting mind. Substance into wealth is law completed, not law attempted, not law occasionally remembered. Law completed, from the first definite impression to the last efficient action, from the invisible formation to the visible channel, from the substance that receives form to the wealth that arrives in the hands of the person who held the mold steady. This is what you are now committed to. This is what the certain way looks like from the inside of someone who has chosen it fully. Complete the sequence. Hold the form. Let the invisible become visible, because the law, as Wattles taught, never fails those who use it all the way through.